All right, so we're picking up in Matthew chapter 9. And again, just like last week, I've tried to do a table lining up each of the stories or events that occur in Matthew chapter 9 with its cross-reference in Mark and Luke. And so our first event that we're going to look at is Jesus healing the man who was had palsy, who was paralyzed, paralytic. So Matthew, it starts off, he entered into a ship and passed over. And we know from Matthew 8, he had been bouncing back and forth across the various edges of the Sea of Galilee or the Sea of Tiberias. Often he used that for crowd control. He would use that to slip away and get to a new group, or often that group would run around and try and track him down. It says he came into his own city. So trying to figure out, well, what's his own city? If you look over there in Mark, it says he entered into Capernaum. So that was, again, the base camp that he used in many occasions after he had such a hostile reaction in the town they grew up in, Nazareth. When he read in the synagogue and told them that, these days, this day as these prophecies have been fulfilled in your ears, they tried to kill him. So Capernaum became what's described in Matthew as his own city. And so he's there, he's teaching, and there's Pharisees and there's doctors of the law sitting around him. They're experts, right? Not just local ones. They'd come from every town out of Galilee, that's the northern region, out of Judea, it's the southern region, and then Jerusalem, which is the capital. And you also get the detail, and the power of the Lord was present to heal them, right? So there were those who came, they were gathered around the doorway. There wasn't room inside the home to receive everybody, but the uppity muckety mucks, if you will, were there and sitting, and he was healing people, and he was teaching them, and he was preaching the word. All right. And so Matthew says they brought to him a man sick of the palsy lying on the bed. Mark gives the details, borne by 4 different men. They're carrying him, and they tried to get him in. They couldn't get him in. They sought means to bring him in to Jesus. Again, they were gathered about the door. There wasn't room to receive them, and they could not get through, nigh the press. And they could not find a way because of the great multitude. They went up on the housetop, and they uncovered the roof. That's how Mark describes it. Luke says they went down through the tiling. So this tile roof there, they broke it up. I'm sure the homeowner was, I would have been upset. But they're so determined to get their friend into the presence of Jesus that they're breaking up the roof of this house to then lower him down on this bed or this couch into Jesus's presence. So Jesus is seeing their faith, and that's consistent across all 3. Their faith. It was the faith of these friends of carrying this sick one unto him, believing he had the ability to heal them. He turns to the guy laying on the bed and does just exactly what you expect him to. He says, "Son, be of good cheer, thy sins be forgiven thee." Which obviously is not what the friends were thinking of when they came. They weren't seeking the forgiveness of sins for their friend. They were hoping he'd be healed from his paralysis. But Jesus is obviously setting up a lesson. He's teaching something here. So be of good cheer. That's the nugget that's added in Matthew. Thy sins be forgiven thee. Now, you've got doctors of the law, you've got Pharisees, you've got scribes, you've got legal, Old Testament experts sitting there, and they start thinking within themselves, reasoning in their hearts, begin to reason. So this is all silent. Who is this that speaketh blasphemies? Who can forgive sins but God alone? All right, so they're thinking that Jesus is just, by pronouncing the forgiveness of sins, that he's committed a blasphemy, because that right is reserved to God alone, which is true. But what they don't know is that Jesus is God. And being God, he knew what was going on inside their head and their hearts, knowing their hearts, knowing their thoughts, perceived in his spirit that they so reasoned within themselves, perceived their thoughts. He answers unto them, why reason ye these things in your hearts? Or wherefore think ye evil in your hearts? And then he gives a question. Which is easier, to say to the sick of the palsy, thy sins be forgiven thee, or to say, arise, take up thy bed, and walk? So it's easy for one to say, your sins are forgiven. It's easy because there's no way to demonstrate it, right? How can you show that sins have been forgiven just by speaking it? And so he said, I'm going to use this as a teaching moment, and so I could say that, or I could say, arise and take up thy bed and walk. That's a really hard thing to do, because it would be very manifest of whether it's been accomplished or not, whether or not the guy gets up. He says, but that ye may know that the Son of Man, again, that's a title that's referred to Christ. He's both referred to as the Son of God and the Son of Man, and that deals with his dual nature, both divine and human, that the Son of Man hath power on earth to forgive sins. I'm going to show you that I have the power to forgive sins, something that you can't see, by doing a hard thing that you can see. And turns to the guy who's sick of the palsy. He says, I say unto thee, I'm talking to you now, arise, take up thy bed, and go into thine house. All right. Those were not suggestions. That was a command. And what happened? Immediately, he arose, took up the bed, and went forth before everybody. Everyone knew this guy was so sick that his buddies had brought him and ripped up the roof of the house and lowered him down. Now he has been healed. He's able to carry his bed. Immediately he stood up, picked up his bed, and departed to his own house, glorifying God. I've ever had something in a cast, but you don't use something very long, your muscles atrophy and you got no strength in it. So not only was there, a healing of whatever the root cause was of the palsy, his muscles were strengthened so that he could immediately stand up and then have extra strength to, lost sound. Let's see. Microphone, now I'm muted. Can you hear me now? Test 1, 2. All right, so we've got a paralytic who has just been healed. He's got the strength not only to stand up, which is amazing in and of himself, but he's got the additional strength to carry his bed. And he departs out to his house. Get the additional detail there in Luke, but he was glorifying God. So you've got this massive multitude there in the house and outside. What's their reaction? They're amazed. They're glorifying God. They marveled that God had given such power unto men, saying, we never saw it on this fashion. Or in Luke, it was described as, we have seen strange things today. So from that, he goes forth, and he goes by the seaside again, and all the multitudes following after him, and he taught them. And as he's going by the way, he passes by Levi, or in the book of Matthew is recorded as Matthew, sitting at the receipt of custom. He was a publican. The publican is one who worked for the public, for the Romans. He was a tax collector. Whatever they said to collect, he would collect. And the association with the term publican is very negative because they were cheats. If the Romans said to collect, 5, units of, dollars or whatever their currency was from somebody, they could add up, more than that, and they'd pocket it. You get that little fella Zacchaeus. He was a head publican, and he was made himself very rich doing that. And so that was what was so significant about his conversion there. So he sees Levi, aka Matthew, the son of Alphaeus, sitting there at the receipt of custom, and he turns to him and he commands him, "Follow me." Again, this is written in the, I believe it's imperative, which is the instruction to do it. This is the command. This is not a suggestion, not a please, would you like to. So he commanded, "Follow me." And it says that he left all, he rose up, and he followed him. Now, Matthew, being the writer of the Gospel of Matthew, doesn't make it clear what happens next. It's just that Jesus, sat at a meal in a house, in the house. If you read Mark and Luke, you realize it is Matthew's house. So like the Apostle John in his Gospel wouldn't reveal himself, by name, just say the disciple who Jesus loved. Matthew similarly kind of putting to the side the details that would make him the center. So Jesus is sitting in Levi or Matthew's house. He made a great feast in his own house. It's explicit. And there was a great company of publicans and of others that sat down with him. That's how Luke would describe it. Matthew said there was publicans and sinners, which came and sat down with Jesus and his disciples. Many publicans and sinners sat down together with Jesus and his disciples, for there were many, and they followed him. That's a detail I hadn't caught before. You've got this imagery of these publicans, these tax collectors, known to be, cheaters and, really betrayers of their country. To be a Jew working for the Romans was a pretty heinous thing. But there's also sinners, those who you knew that their life and their profession, whether it was, a harlot or whatever, that by sight, you knew that they were sinners. And yet there were many, and they were following Jesus, and they came and sat down together with him. This is not something that the religious elite at that day would do or permit. They thought that they were clean and holy, and therefore to be even in the presence of such people would defile themselves, and so they wouldn't. They wouldn't eat with them. They wouldn't touch them. They wouldn't, abide with them, which is what prompts them, the scribes and Pharisees, when they saw him eating with publicans and sinners, they murmur and they go talk to his disciples. They wouldn't go talk to Jesus. He's in the middle of it, right? They probably wouldn't even want to go in that far into the household. But they talk to his disciples, says, "Why does your master do this? Why is he eating with publicans and sinners? How is he eateth and drinketh with them?" They think this is a contamination. Why would he do that? The disciples don't have a chance to answer because Jesus heard it. Whether he heard it audibly or heard it within his spirit, I don't know. I assume audibly. But Jesus turns and answers him and says that they that are whole have no need of the physician, but they that are sick. So to be whole means sound in body. To be well, we kind of have the practice of going to preventative care now, but that would have been a foreign concept before, that you don't go pay money to see a doctor when you're doing fine. You go when you're sick. So that's the illustration he's using, that they think, the Pharisees and the scribes and the religious elite think that they are whole, that they're sound, so they don't need help from anybody. But here you've got the sick, the sinners, those who know that they are not good and well. They need the physician, and they know it. So the additional detail we get here in Matthew is, "But go ye and learn what that meaneth. I will have mercy and not sacrifice." He's not come to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance. So he's not coming to pat people on the back and saying that, "Oh, you've done good and you're righteous, and you've done all the sacrifices that I require, and therefore you're good." But rather, the role of Christ was coming to have mercy on sinners, and calling them to repentance. And this is a different message that one gets kind of distorted today. Of Jesus is calling you as you are, but it's not to stay as you are. It's not to you're fine as a sinner. Just stay, whatever that is. It's to call us to repentance, to turn. and to turn to him and from the sin. But the upbraiding here is that this is why he's sitting down to eat with them, because this is his audience. This is the ones he came to have mercy upon, to call them to repentance. Those who think they're righteous don't know how sick they are, because there's none righteous but God. We're all totally depraved. There's none that seeketh after God, no, not one. You can see all that in Romans and in the Psalms. But the Pharisees and the scribes thought they were good. They deluded themselves. So while they're there, you've got another question that arises. First, why are you eating with them at all? Next is, why are you eating? And so there are some disciples of John, John the Baptist. He's in prison at this point. He had spoken against Herod for having his brother's wife, and among other things, and ticked her off. And so he's been thrown in jail. And so you've got his disciples and also some Pharisees. It was their practice that they would fast, often. And they'd say, why do the disciples of John fast often and make prayers, but thy disciples eat and drink? And so he's never, they've not seen Jesus's disciples being called to abstain from food, to fast, and to make long prayer vigils. So like, what's different about you? Why are you doing that? And so Jesus gives them an answer using a parable, saying, "Can the children of the bride chamber mourn as long as the bridegroom is with them?" And so the children of the bride chamber, those who are there to celebrate, a wedding, and in the chamber with the bridegroom, that's his family, and so he's there. It's a happy time. You're celebrating. You can't mourn while he's there. As long as they have the bridegroom with them, they cannot fast. It's not time for it. But the days will come when the bridegroom shall be taken away from them, and then shall they fast in those days. And so obviously Jesus is the groom. While he's here and present in this, 3.5 year ministry, this is not the time for fasting. It's not the time for, long prayer vigils, but rather this is the time for being in his presence. But eventually he will be taken away for a time, and then they'll be fasting in those days. And then he gives them a parable. So that was the answer. Then he gives them a parable. So it's twofold. One involves sewing. I don't patch clothes very often, but I think I can understand that, saying that no man putteth a piece of new cloth unto an old garment, for that which is taken in to fill it up taketh from the garment, and the rent is made worse. So you got a new patch, you're going into an old garment. The new cloth is so strong that it will pull from the other one, and what you had was a little hole is now a bigger hole. So you can't blend those two concepts, the new and the old. Same illustration in different form with another parable. It says, "Neither do men put new wine into old bottles, else the bottles break, and the wine runneth out, and the bottles perish." Mark would use the language of bursting. The bottles will burst, and the wine will be spilled, and the bottles be marred. And so, but they put the new wine into new bottles, and both are preserved. What's going on there is that old wine skins or bottles don't have the ability to absorb the pressure that's put upon them from new wine, and so they'll rend, they'll break, and you lose both the wine and the bottle. And so the idea here is that he's new. He's not trying to force this new covenant into the model of the old covenant. Right? It's a new garment. It's not patching up the old. It's new wine. We're not going to use the old before. And then also, no man also having drunk old wine straightway desireth new, for he saith the old better. That's just human nature. The thing that you know and that you're comfortable with and that you like, you're going to prefer that. And so that's going to be the resistance you're going to have from many of the Jews, is that we know the Old Testament ceremonial law. That's what we want. That's what we're comfortable with. But so he is not operating within that paradigm, but rather he's coming with a new covenant. And this is not, fully fleshed out here. He often would speak in parables and not fully convey the information to his audience. Later, he'd explain it more fully to his disciples. All right, so leaving the feast there at Matthew's house. From Mark, we know that he's going to pass over by ship to another side. There's going to be people near unto him. And then there's going to come a ruler out of the synagogue. We know that his name from Mark and Luke, his name is Jairus. He came down and he worships the Lord. He fell at his feet and he begged him. He's besotting him. He's seeking him that he would come to his house. He had one little girl. She was only 12 years old, and she lay a-dying at the point of death. So Matthew, when it says even now dead, it just means she's just about to die. Come and lay your hand on her that she'll live. So this is an urgent time. This is at a knife's edge. You go just a little too far and she's gonna die. Please come and heal her. So this is a big deal. And so he went. But there's a big old crowd of people. They're thronging him. They're crowding him. They're following him. It's hard to walk through a big old crowd. And as he's going, there's a particular woman who's come seeking him. She's got an issue of blood. Basically, she's had her cycle, but has never stopped for 12 straight years. And under the law, during that period, she's considered unclean, which means she can't go to the tabernacle. She can't make contact with a spouse. She's got just this terrible isolation that has been put upon her on top of the physical issue. And so it's more than just she's uncomfortable, but she's spent all of her money over the past more than a decade trying to fix this, spending on physicians, and she was nothing better, but rather she grew worse. And so she heard that Jesus was there, and she came seeking him, thinking that if I could just touch the border of his garment, just the fringe, then I'll be healed, be made whole. And so she did, and immediately her issue was healed. That blood that had been flowing for so long healed. It dried up, and she had been healed from that plague. Now, Jesus knew what happened. He knew, knowing in himself that virtue or force or power had gone out from him, that he had, work had been done through him. He turned around and asked the question, "Who touched my clothes?" Or "Who touched me?" Here in Luke, it says, "All denied." Everyone said, "It wasn't me." And his disciples, they've got to be thinking, the ruler of the synagogue over here, he's asked us to come heal his daughter. We're pausing in the middle to try and ask, "Who touched me?" Hey, Lord, there's a whole crowd around you saying, "Who touched me?" That's kind of silly. Everybody's touching you. And Jesus said, "Somebody's touched me, for I perceive that virtue has gone out." He looked round about to see her that had touched her. And when the woman saw that she was not hid, there was no getting away with this, because as an unclean person, it was wrong under the law for her to touch him. That would be defiling to him, right? That same thing that the scribes and Pharisees were worried about. That's what she was worried about. She could have been in real trouble. So she came fearing and trembling, knowing what was done in her, and came and fell down before him and confessed it. She declared unto him and before all the people for what cause she had touched him. So, this is a big deal for her to admit it out loud, both with fearing how people would react, how he would react. But so she fesses up and how she was healed immediately. And so when he says, "Daughter, be of good comfort," that's a big deal. He's not going to upbraid her for reaching out to her and doing what the scribes would have, been disgusted and would have vilified her for being so wicked to try and touch one while they were unclean. Be of good comfort. Thy faith hath made thee whole. Go in peace, and be whole of thy plague. It says, and the woman was made whole from that hour, so she was. But all this has taken time, right? And so they had been en route to a very present emergency. He's been waylaid by a crowd. He stopped to find, and there's a delay of everyone denying, no, I didn't touch. And then finally, when she knew she couldn't get away, she owns up to it, and he speaks to her and comforts her and sends her on her way in peace. Now, in the meantime, a runner comes from the synagogue's house saying, don't bother the master any further. Your daughter's dead. And Jesus, when he heard that, he turned to the ruler, Jairus. He said, be not afraid, only believe. And Luke adds, she shall be made whole. So we get to the house, and he doesn't allow anybody to come in, because, man, there's a big old crowd, except for Peter and James, John, and the brother of James. And then also the father and mother of the maiden. We get that nugget there. So you've got this small crowd goes in. And as he comes in the house, he sees that there's minstrels and there's people making a noise. And so they were prepared for her death. They already had people there ready to, wail and weep. And that's what they're doing. There's a tumult, and they're weeping and wailing greatly. That was what was expected when you had one to die. And he asks them, why are you making this ado? What's much ado about nothing, that Shakespeare thing, making a big old noise. He says, give place. The maid is not dead, but she sleeps. So how do they react? They start laughing and making fun of him. This guy is crazy. He's nuts. He's dead. We know she's dead. They're laughing him to scorn. How could it be so foolish to say something like that, knowing that she was dead? But he kicks them out. They're all going to be put out. And he takes the father and the mother, and then they're with him, and they enter into the room where the damsel is lying. He takes her by the hand, and he says unto her, and I guess that's Aramaic, Tabitha Kumi, and then Mark would give the interpretation saying, damsel, I say unto thee, arise. Luke just puts it in shorthand of maid, arise. So it's taking her by the hand, tells her to arise, and what happens? She arose. Now, all those people knew she was dead, so much so that they're willing to laugh in his face and laugh him to scorn. This was not a case of, she was close to dead. She was close to dead before Dad came looking for Jesus. She was dead. And so this was a big deal. And so the maid arose. Straightway she arose, and not only that, she walked. Again, just like the paralytic, it wasn't just, all right, you're alive and you're barely alive. If we have someone on the table in the hospital and you're doing CPR and get out the pads and you lose their heart for a minute and then they get them back, they're not suddenly all better. They're still really weak and struggling. This is not like that. She arose and she walked, and he commanded her to give her something to eat. And her parents were astonished with a great astonishment. So there's a double emphasis. And he tells them, don't tell anybody about this. Straightly charging this, that's stern. And Mark and Luke don't record it, but what happens after that? The fame hereof went abroad into all the land. Whether the parents disobeyed or not, you've got all these mourners and minstrels who'd been kicked out and been told that she's sleeping, and they laughed that guy to scorn. It wouldn't have taken them too long to see her later that, oh my goodness, she was dead. We knew she was dead, and here she is alive. So that fame that, he had taken one who was dead and brought her back to life is a big deal. I mean, this trumps all of the miracles that he's done thus far. This is the first recorded resurrection that he's performed. So, got a blank thing there on my table messed up. So if you continue in Matthew, after that point, you're going to have two other events, and I could not find a cross-reference to these particular events in Mark and Luke. They may be referenced there, but the language is so broad that you can't narrow it down with great precision. I mean, a ruler whose name is Jairus and his 12-year-old daughter being brought back from the dead is much, much more specific than Jesus heals two blind men. He did that a great deal, And so it would not be unsurprising to have that recorded on more than one occasion. So Jesus departed after healing Jairus' daughter, and the two blind men are following him. They're crying out, "Thou Son of David." I mean, that's a title for the Christ. And basically, they're calling him Christ. "Have mercy on us." When he was come into the house, the blind men came to him, and Jesus said unto them, "Believe ye that I am able to do this?" And they said, "Yea, Lord." And he knew that already because they'd been following after him, seeking, mercy. What's the mercy for a blind man to be able to see? And he touched their eyes and said, "According to your faith, be it unto you." And their eyes were opened. And Jesus again straightly charged them, saying that, "See that no man know it." They willfully disobeyed, but they, when they were departed, spread abroad his fame in all that country. And so you've got healing from the dead, and here you've got healing the eyes of two blind men. Something that modern medicine, we can't replicate this, and certainly not back at that point. So, and he's just doing it by touching their eyes. And so he's demonstrating his power over his creation. That which was dead, he can make alive. That which had no sight, he can make see. I mean, this is that song of amazing grace. I was blind and now I see. And then they bring unto him a man that was dumb. That doesn't mean he was unintelligent. That meant he could not speak. He was apparently possessed with a devil, a fallen angel or demon, however you want to describe that. It's all the same thing. And he cast out the devil. And when he did, the dumb spake. And the multitudes there are marveling and they're amazed. It was never so seen in Israel. And so the one for healing the blind man, that was done inside a house. And they leave and they bring unto him a dumb man. And so the dumb man is now able to speak. And so the multitudes, whether they were in the house or outside the house, could see the before and after. And this has never happened. This is unique. This is amazing. But the Pharisees, the ones who don't like him, the ones who think that he's a problem, they try to ascribe it. Well, he must have some connection to the devil. If he's casting out devils, he must be working for the prince of the devils, which is Satan. So they're attempting to accuse him of being in league with Satan. And then finally, he goes and he went through all the cities and the villages, teaching in their synagogues. And so you've got a large passage of time here that he's leaving Capernaum, and he's traveling throughout, most likely in Galilee, going city to city, village to village, teaching in their synagogues if they've got one, and preaching the gospel of the kingdom, and healing every sickness and every disease among the people. This is dramatically different than the people who pretend to be healers today. They don't go publicly and just heal anybody. And you got to come to them, and generally there's some money that needs to be exchanged. But I mean, if someone had this ability today, why are they not just walking through hospitals? So every sickness, every disease, there's nothing too hard for him. But when he saw the multitude, he was moved with compassion upon them. He was sympathetic. He had an empathy for them because they fainted and were scattered abroad as sheep having no shepherd. And he turns to his disciples and said unto them, "The harvest is plenteous, but the laborers are few. Pray ye therefore the Lord of the harvest that he will send forth laborers into his harvest." And so this is, the beginning of the gospel commission or charge that, praying that the Lord will send more laborers who will teach the gospel. At this point, Jesus is the central, apostle. He's the central messenger. He's the one who's speaking. But there will come a time when he's going to give the authority initially unto the apostles, and then there's going to be 70 after that, and then and from there, the gospel ministry will grow and grow and grow and grow. Now for the last 2,000 years, that the Lord is going to be the one who sends them, but the harvest, those are his people, the ones who need to hear the truth of who Jesus is and what he's done. The harvest is plenteous. There's plenty of opportunities to speak and be heard, but there aren't many laborers, in particular at this point. So pray the Lord of the harvest that he will send forth laborers into his harvest. This is a similar message that Jesus would later say, right as he's going to send those 70 out. But chronologically, that will be later in time. So that's Matthew chapter